G'day guys, Carl from Go Travel. Today I'm in the garage and we're going to talk about tyres. But not just any tyres, we're going to talk about the best tyre size for a Y62 Patrol. Well, the best tyre size in my opinion. So those of you who have followed me for a while know that I've been playing around with tyres, I've changed sizes, I've gone a few different sizes over the time I've had my Patrol, but I've worked it out. I've finally got what I think is the best tyre size. It is a 295/70 R18. Until next time, go travel. But in all seriousness, there's a lot to take into consideration with tyre size. There's a lot of important information about tyres that I think a lot of people might not necessarily know. I'm going to go a bit in depth here and explain a bit of the redneck science behind this, pros and cons of different tyre sizes, and in the end I'll give my opinion of what the best tyre size I think is. And I think some of you might be surprised. Tyres for the Y62 has been a little bit of a journey for me. From when we first ordered it to when we struggled to get tyres and not knowing what was going to fit height-wise with the garage, to losing a wheel, to then looking at fuel economy. There's a heap behind it. These are the 4 tyre sizes I've run since owning the car. Now, stock tyres, I put them back on recently. I didn't actually really drive the car much with them, but they're a 265/70 R18. Most recently, I decided to buy a small set of Maxxis Razor ATs. These are a 275/70 R18. It's a little bit bigger than stock. Kumo MT71s, these were the first tyres I put on the Patrol. These are a 295/70 R18. And the reason I put these tyres on is I always wanted to go 35s, but I didn't know how I was going to go height-wise, so I bought these tyres because they were slightly smaller than a 35. The Yokos, big 35s, 35, 12.5 R18. Now the Yokos, I bought them after I lost a wheel and wrecked a tyre. I decided that I was just going to buy a brand new set of muddies. Why do I still have that? Because if you're going to run 35-inch tyres, you need a 35-inch equivalent spare. And as you can see, there's not a lot of difference height-wise in these two tyres. So is bigger better? Of course it is. Everyone wants bigger. That's why we drive big V8 petrol Patrols. No, in all honesty, I think there's a lot of advantages to big tyres. There's also a lot of advantages to small tyres. The factory tyres, look, I don't think there's a lot of advantages to them, especially on the factory wheels. I want to go through some important figures tyre size-wise that people often overlook. I don't know if a lot of people know this. All tyres are not equal. So you can have a 35-inch tyre in 2 different brands and they're completely different sizes, even though the side of the tyre says 35, 12.5 R18. And I'll give a good example of this. BF Goodrich tyres are traditionally small tyres. 35, 12.5 R18 BFG KM3, they're an 877mm OD tyre. So OD means overall diameter. Whereas if you look at a Nitto Trail Grappler, so a Nitto mud tyre, the overall diameter of them is 890mm. So when you look at that, that's 13mm, which doesn't seem like a lot. What you'll find is there's probably less than 13mm difference between them 2 tyres. So the reality is, these Kumos would be a very equivalent size tyre compared to a 35-inch BFG KM3. I'll go into all the other important numbers that matter when it comes to tyre size. I'm going to try not to bore everyone with this info because it's a lot of info and some people will find it interesting, some people won't care. I'll explain why these numbers are important, but the basic. LT light truck, 275, talks about the section width. Now the section width of a tyre isn't the tread, it's actually the outside of each sidewall. So that's the actual section, that's the tread width. So tread width is another important figure. So 70 means the sidewall is 70% of the section width. This gives you your sidewall height. And then obviously R18, so talking about radial and 18-inch tyre. So when I talk about tyres, you'll hear me reference OD a lot, which is overall diameter. So what overall diameter is the actual height of the tyre. So generally this number's in millimetres. You'll find that a 35-inch tyre is generally somewhere between that 880 and 890 overall diameter. So to put it into perspective, the stock is an 832mm OD. The Maxxis is an 846mm OD. Not 100% sure on the Kumos because they don't have all the tech specs listed, but I'd expect it to be somewhere around that high 870, low 880s. And then the Yoko's been a large tyre again. All the tech specs aren't listed on the Yoko website either, but I expect them Yokos to be pretty close to an 890 OD. So when we talk about the section width, like I said, you've got the outside of the tyre from the widest point. That'll give you the section width, which is generally this 275, 295, 265, whatever size tyre you go. What you will find though, when you look at tech specs of tyres, is that 275, they always go to the closest 5mm. So for example, the section width of this Maxxis is actually 277 wide. So when I talk about tread width, I'll use my tape measure to show you this one. This tyre here, the Bridgie, it is a 265 tyre. The tread width is about 200mm. The Maxxis, we're looking at a 275, whereas the tread width is around that 230mm. The Kumo, being a 295, we're looking at a tread width of about 240mm. And then the Yoko, we're looking at a tread width of about 270mm. So as you can see, the tread width is always significantly less than the section width. So when it comes to tyre size, if you're looking for big tyres, those tyres that have got a more squared edge generally have a wider tread width. I'll try and capture this. So if you look at the Yoco, they're a very square tyre. So they've got quite a wide section width. So these highway trains, you can see, we start to taper from here around. So that's why they're a very narrow tyre. So all the technical information tyre-wise with overall diameter, tread width, section width, all that stuff, it's really important. You might want a bigger tyre, you might want a smaller tyre. There's different reasons for it, but generally speaking, with a Y62, you've got all the room in the world, so it doesn't matter what size 35s you put on it. But it will affect things like fuel economy, power loss, things like that. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, something to consider. A set of BFG 35s will be more economical than these Yoco 35s, just because of the difference in size. The last thing I want to show you is calculators. The best thing about wheel and tyre size nowadays is there's a calculator for everything online. This is just literally tyresize.com. Now you can see this is 265 compared to a 275, and it just shows you the slight increase in height, width, and then it gives you all the actual info down there. The other thing is wheel offset calculator. So this is standard versus 35 on a 1 inch wider plus 18 wheel. So it actually shows you what you can see sticking out. If I was more tech savvy, I'd be able to actually take like video screenshots, but I don't need to do that. If you're interested in wheel and tyre stuff, Google wheel offset calculator and Google tyre size calculator. The other thing, just want to show you, this is just looking at the Maxxis website. All these figures down here, this gives you all the technical specs. So a lot of good tyre websites will have all these tech specs and just shows you all the information that you need to know, which is all that tread width, section width, tread depth, and overall diameter, all them things, all that key information that will actually tell you how big your tyre is. It'll help you better understand what tyres you're actually putting on size-wise. Standard, 35 to 12.5. There's quite a bit of difference. 295 stock. You can see significantly higher, definitely noticeably wider. 275 70 versus 265 70. A little bit of difference, more in the width. If you're still watching and I haven't bored you away, we'll go through the pros and cons of these tyres, and I'll talk to you about tyre sizes and what I think the best size is and why I think it's the best size. Standard Bridgie Jewelers. The reality is they're almost a 33-inch tyre. They're quite, fuel economy wise, they're pretty good. The old guys will say, if something's not broke, don't fix it. But let's be realistic. Us as four-wheel drivers, we love modifying things. The Maxxis, the Razors, they're 275 70. Significantly wider tread width. More traction, more grip on the road. With the tread pattern, they're still a quiet tyre. With the tread depth, they're a little bit more meaty than a factory tyre. Got a slightly more aggressive sidewall on them, gives a little bit of character. Overall, not a bad looking all-terrain tyre, pretty good tyre. I've actually quite like these. And again, a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, just gives a little bit better stance. Now 295, I think it's a good size for a Patrol. Roughly from stock to 295, you're looking at an almost 2-inch height increase. To me, a 295 is a noticeable increase over stock, whereas a 275, it's not that much noticeable that it's bigger. Obviously, the bigger tyre you go, you get more clearance under your car as well, which creates more ground clearance, which for off-roading, that's ideally what you want. A 35, as far as looks go, wide tyre, and like I say, you can noticeably see that that is wider than a 295. Like significantly wider. These under the Patrol look awesome. Just big, fat, wide tyres with the right offset. You can't go wrong. Obviously though, bigger tyres use more fuel. Another thing to consider is mud tyres also use more fuel because they've got more rolling resistance opposed to that of a highway train tyre. Another pro to big tyres. Seeing it's rained a lot and there's potholes everywhere around. When you hit a pothole in a little tyre, you know you've hit it. A 35 or a 295, they sort of shrug it off. They don't feel it as much because obviously the bigger rolling diameter, it just sort of just goes through it, just takes it, which that's what makes them better off-road, is the bigger diameter. It actually climbs over things easier because it's bigger, so it's not working as hard to step up something, it just sort of rolls over it. There's a few different ways to look at this when you think about what the best tyre size is. If you're going to be staying on road, towing a caravan, reality is standard tyres will give the best fuel economy. 275 70 will make it look slightly better and still give reasonable economy. Whereas if you're doing a lot of off-road and four-wheel driving where ground clearance makes a big difference, then 295 or 35 to 12.5. Either or are probably a better option. The price of fuel was the main thing that triggered me to go experimenting with tyres. So when fuel hit around $2.40 a litre, that's when I went, you know what, let's do some redneck science, let's run a few experiments, some real testing, and let's see what's a better tyre option fuel-wise. Now I'll just touch on roughly the economy of these tyres. And if you're really worried about economy, you could always drive nicely, do things differently. For me, I didn't change the way I drove. I just went, let's modify a few things and see what happens. The standard tyres, admittedly I didn't run them for very long, but what I found is I was generally in the really high 14s, low 15s. The 275/70s, I found that when I put them on, I've been getting anywhere between 14.5 to 15.5. The 295 size in the mud tyres, I ran them for a good 12 months, maybe a little bit longer. What I found with them is average was always around 16.5 litres. When I went to the Yokos, the 35 12.5, I found that economy was more around the 18.5 mark. Now the economy of all them tyres isn't taking into account the different rolling diameters or rolling circumference. It's not taking into account that you actually travel further on a bigger tyre. One thing I found, when you've got cruise set at 100 with these littler tyres, reality is you're in the low 90s. When you've got cruise set at 100 with 35s, you're actually doing a little bit over 100. I think everyone knows that when you buy a new car, there's a tolerance in speedos, which is, I think it's up to 10% either way. So with the big Patrol, I think Nissan's intentionally done this. So the speedo is actually 10% out higher. When you think you're doing 100 on standard tyres and you've got cruise set, reality is you'll be in the low 90s. So what this does is you're actually saving fuel. So you're not actually going as fast as you think you're actually going slower. I've verified it on a few different speed apps, and I think this actually fudges their claimed fuel numbers of 14 litres, whatever they claim the average is on these things. So I think they actually done that intentionally so these things seem better than what they are. So the reality is, with your big 35s, they're around 7% bigger overall. There's a lot of math behind it, and I worked out how much further you travel on a 35, based off the fact that your speedo believes that every revolution of the tyre is travelling so far, which gives you your speed. I'm not 100% sure how speed sensors work, but I'll be guarantee you that they're worked out off the factory tyre size. That's why when you change to a bigger size tyre, it actually doesn't factor in. So whatever the factory calibration is, it believes it's on that tyre regardless of what's bolted to it. This is another selling point for big tyres. So when you look at 35-inch tyre, it's actually 7% bigger than the factory tyre, which means you're travelling 7% further, 7% faster. The Kumo, 5% roughly. The Maxxis is actually 2% bigger, and then obviously that's the baseline. You look at the 35-inch tyre size, when you do 100 Ks, you've actually travelled 107. When you do 1,000 Ks, you've actually travelled 1,070. Or big picture later on resale value, when you do 100,000 Ks, you've actually done 107,000 Ks. So reality is, the bigger the tyre, the less Ks on your car for distance actually travelled. So that's probably an actual selling point. The biggest thing that hit me is I never factored that in when I was doing economy. So while my Yokos, I believed they were returning about 18.5, the actual reality of it is they were actually sort of low 17s. So in the same with the Kumo. Whilst I always worked it out at 16.5 average, that was just based on kilometres travelled on the dash versus litres put in. So again, same thing. These are actually around that high 15s, not actually in the 16s. And then the 2%, well, obviously there's a difference, but it's marginal, it's not much. So I guess when you look at economy-wise, 35s versus factory tyres, definitely there is fuel difference. Is it going to break the bank? I don't think so. I really don't. I don't think that fuel economy, whilst there's a difference, it's not enough for me to say that that's the reason I would buy smaller tyres. Another interesting thing that I also found fuel economy-wise, this is just an unrelated fuel economy thing, is I put a few tanks of 91 in the Patrol and actually found that my fuel economy was roughly 1.5 litres, 2 litres worse off than when I ran premium in it. If you want looks, 35, 12.5. If you do a lot of off-roading, definitely. The wider the tyre, the bigger the tyre, better clearance, better traction, all day, every day. Going to be a better tyre. A little bit worse off fuel economy-wise, but again, not a break the bank situation. 295. 70, 18. Honestly, that is the best tyre size for a Patrol, in my opinion. Still a big tyre, still gives an aggressive look, still significantly wider. Not much difference overall in height between these two tyres, between the 295 and the 35. Width-wise, the 35's definitely wider. Being slightly narrower than the 12.5-inch wide tyre. I think fuel economy-wise, that helps. So I think as far as bang for buck, the 295s, I think, are the better tyres. I did talk about power loss. You've got a 400 horsepower V8, right? Power loss isn't a huge thing on these. You put 35s on like a little 4-cylinder, 5-cylinder diesel, you know you've got 35s on there. You notice there's a big difference. With the V8, it's not as bad because obviously it's got a heap of power and a heap of torque. So whilst I do love these new tyres, I do really like them. In the end of the day, I'm going to go back to a 295. The only thing I haven't decided yet is I'm kind of liking all-terrains. And I don't normally like all-terrains, but I'm liking them. I don't know what it is. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about tyre size is availability. It is actually easier to get a 35, 12.5, 18 opposed to a 295, 70, 18, but that's all relevant to where you are. When it comes to tyres for your Patrol, I think the most important thing to consider is actually wheels. And it doesn't matter what wheels you buy. I just think that the factory offset is crap. They sit well inside the guards. The biggest thing I said when I put the little tyres on is I hated them because of the offset. When I bought these new wheels, 9-inch wide wheel with a plus 18 offset, the same as the KMCs, these actually fixed all my hatred of little tyres. Even though the tyres were significantly smaller than 35s, the reason them 275s didn't look too bad is because of the offset. Big picture for me, what am I going to do? I've got all these bloody tyres now. I'll run my Maxxis ATs until I wear them out. I'm going to put my Yoko tyres on them wheels because I think the American Outlaw wheels, they're a better wheel just because of the clearance between the brake caliper. Anyway, that's enough babbling from me. I think the 295 70/18 is the best tyre size for the Y62 Patrol. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. I hope I explained everything well enough. Of course, if I didn't, comment below, ask me any questions. If you like what you see, feel free to subscribe. And until next time, guys, go travel.